In this brief demonstration, I'm going to show you how the RSpace inventory system can be used to extract and display metadata about your samples, and how similarly those samples can be embedded in workflows, and how workflows can also pull in potentially data from third-party systems. So here on my desktop you can see I have RSpace opened up in Chrome on the right in my Macintosh, and then on the left this is actually a projection of my tiny little iPhone SE that's being displayed on the screen. On the desktop browser, I can go ahead and click on inventory to travel to the inventory area if I want to, and then from here I can easily go ahead and do a search for perhaps something like taxane, and here I'll see a list of samples. I can actually specify that I'm only interested in samples for now, and you can see here now I'm limiting my search here to just my taxane samples. So if I want to, I could go ahead and click on one of those, and that will display the sample information for me on this page. And I can actually do exactly the same thing on my phone too as well. I can tap the inventory tab, I can go to my samples, I can go ahead and say I'd like to search for taxane. And then from amongst my taxane samples, I can choose one particular sample to look at in more detail. And here you can see really the same thing as you're seeing on the browser. Notice I can collapse these sections on both the phone version and the desktop version if I want to. And one of the things you'll notice here is under the custom fields area, we've got a listing of metadata that's important for this particular user that defines a number of characteristics about this particular sample. We've got a SMILES chemistry structure and some other information. So where did this information come from? This custom array of metadata fields here was built for me for this, in this particular sample when I performed an import using the import from CSV tool, which looks like this. So what I actually did here is, if I go ahead and I perhaps move my phone out of the way and I take a look at this document here, you can see that here on the left we've got RSpace, on the right we've got RSpace, on the left we have a view of Chebby, the Chebby website. This is the database that I pulled this data from, and what I did here was I exported this metadata as a CSV file. Then I imported that metadata into RSpace, and that automatically created these fields inside RSpace and also automatically populated them with these values. Now I could, if I want to, now additionally make any number of additional samples using this exact same template, and I'd be offered these same metadata fields, and I'd be able to fill these in as needed manually, or I could populate them programmatically using the API. So let's look at an extension of this idea that we're going to build in RSpace using an integration with a product called FAIMS. So FAIMS is an Australian initiative to build a series of tools for helping individuals who are performing field work to collect information about samples. But it's particularly useful for collecting sample data in the context of an area that has no internet connectivity. So what I've done here is I previously built a workflow called the field collection of soil samples, and I used that workflow to create a new empty document here. And you can see that this document has a number of different fields arranged in a specific order. We're asking the user for a collection date, a collection time, the GPR coordinates of the site. We're asking for some images of the field site, the number of samples collected. We then ask for images of the tubes that the samples were placed into. We ask the user for transmit details that tell us about how the samples were treated, handled, and what the chain of custody was while they were being moved from one location to another. And also we ask them here for the listing in the RSpace inventory system of where the raw unprocessed samples are currently located. And then also we ask the user to list the DNA samples that are then extracted from those raw samples. A fairly straightforward workflow, and this is very easy to perform in the lab. But what if you're in a situation where you don't have access to the internet, and so you can't fill in this detail in real time? You'd have to muck around using some intermediate where you'd record it on paper, or perhaps to a Word file somehow, and then transport it back to you, and then if you're lucky you'll be able to then maybe add the metadata back in manually. A better way to do this is to work with the FAIMS tool that our colleagues have helped us build here for this specific purpose. So what I'm going to do now is look for in here, I have a series of images that will help illustrate this. So what we have here, this by the way is a prompt to help you locate the FAIMS website. That's an Australian initiative, as I mentioned. And then here we can see the template that our colleagues at FAIMS have built for us. This is a tool that would be used on an Android that could be used even if the phone were offline and has no connectivity at all. And you can see it's been set up to represent exactly the same sort of collection events that we used in RSpace. It's asking for the same kinds of information. The field site, information about the containers that the stuff was loaded into, and then ultimately information about things like the chain of custody. And then once the user is able to return to a location where there's internet connectivity, they can go ahead and sync this. And then what will happen is once they click a single sync button, those details would then be seamlessly and automatically transmitted back to RSpace via the API. And these values would be automatically populated with the values that were collected in the field for maximum accuracy and minimum loss of data. It's also allowing you to immediately start integrating workflows, like the collection workflow, with the list of samples that were actually produced, both the immediate raw samples plus any derivative samples that can be added to this workflow using our list of materials feature. So as an example here, if I wanted to add a series of algae samples to this, I can click New Sample. I can say I'd like to locate my samples that are already in the sample system. For brevity, we'll just say algae 1 here. And then for add items, I can either navigate or I can search for specific examples of samples that I know are in here somewhere. Let's go ahead and search for these. And now I can select whatever samples I want and say choose. And this will build for me a list of materials which I can then save to this experiment. And I can add as many additional lists of materials as I want here, so that now I have lists of materials of specific sorts of things associated with this workflow.